There is nothing natural or inevitable about any particular kind of shame or discrimination. Consider the Junkwansi hunter-gatherers of Namibia. When I was there last, I met a man named Tomzo. Tomzo sometimes hears angry voices in his head. He goes to a clinic once a month to get antipsychotic medicines, walks 12 miles each way. When I met with him and his family, the whole village gathered around, and Tomzo's wife said, everybody knows that if Tomzo does not take his medicines, those voices will return. Now, those voices don't come from within him. They come from outside. They were sent by spirits as revenge for a crime committed by a distant ancestor, and they settled randomly in Tomzo. It's not his fault that he's sick, and so he's not stigmatized. Now, at the clinic, they write the word schizophrenia when they give him his medicines, but that word really has no meaning for the Junkwansi. In fact, they have no word for psychosis other than a general word that means crazy. And at any rate, one's only crazy when one is hallucinating. Because for the moment, Tomzo is not hallucinating, no one says he's crazy, and no one stigmatizes him as ill. In another village, I met a little boy, 9 years old, named Geshe. Geshe is nonverbal. He moves his hands and fingers in front of his face in unusual ways. He likes to be alone. He doesn't make good eye contact. Well, were he in a clinic in the United States, he might very well be diagnosed with autism. He has all the classic signs. But when I talked to his parents, I asked them if they'd taken him to a doctor or a nurse or a clinic, and they said, no, why should we? He's perfectly fine. He's incredible at herding the goats. He knows where those goats are every moment, night and day. And then when I asked them if they were worried about who would take care of Geshe once he and his wife passed away, he looked confused, and he looked at the whole village and he said, but we're not all gonna die at once. Now, I would never claim that Junkwansi society is idyllic, but there is something that we can learn from it. They have fashioned a society that accepts differences that we have shunned. They don't believe in the individual who is responsible for all of his successes and failures. They don't believe that a condition like autism or schizophrenia can define a person's entire identity, which of course is the essence of stigma. But in Europe and North America, we have long worshipped the autonomous individual. We've dignified those who produce the most capital, and we have stigmatized those who produce the least. In fact, the first mental illness categories were invented in the early industrial revolution to separate out and to give distinctive identities to the people who were idle or unproductive. In other words, in capitalism, mental illness became a mark of shame. In the United States today, at any moment, 25% of Americans have a mental illness. Some have very serious consequences. Suicide is the third leading cause of death among teenagers. Anorexia nervosa has a mortality rate of as high as 10% by some measures. Yet 60% of Americans with mental illnesses get no treatment at all. Why is this the case? The biggest barrier to care is that people with mental illnesses suffer from a double illness. First, the condition. Second, society's negative reaction. Fortunately, the stigma of mental illness seems to be rapidly diminishing. Post-traumatic stress disorder is no longer just a sign of weakness, but is actually considered a normal reaction to stress, and in some cases, even a sign of resilience and strength. Early intervention, early detection of developmental disabilities has led to growth in special education, opportunities we never imagined. Today, 12% of American public school children receive some form of special education. 10% of Americans have taken an antidepressant. That's as many as take statins, the drugs that lower cholesterol. We need only listen to millennials. I teach a class in which a student recently spoke up and said how hard it was for her to get diagnosed with ADHD. I mean, she just talks openly, as all my students do today, about their struggles. She said that her father wouldn't take her to a specialist to get diagnosed because he said she just wasn't working hard enough to get good grades. And she told the class, when I finally got to college and I sought care and I got diagnosed with ADHD, that was the best day of my freshman year. Because finally somebody saw that I wasn't lazy or stupid, that I just needed a little bit of help. What's more, some of the people we admire the most, celebrities and athletes, are shining a light on their struggles. Speaking of himself and other athletes, NBA basketball player Kelly Oubre said, "We're just normal human beings." I mean, think about that. We're just normal human beings, and we've gotten to this point where a mental illness is a part of what we expect of human existence. People with mental and physical disabilities are increasingly rejecting old norms, including the milestones like moving out of the house at 18 or 21 or whatever arbitrary age we pick. Being gay, transgender, gender fluid are becoming political, personal, and social identities rather than evidence of pathology. And my own daughter, Isabel, self-identifies proudly as autistic. And I less often hear that question that every parent who has an autistic child is asked. The question that the Juntlasi would never even conjure up: will she be able to live independently? Now, we shouldn't romanticize these changes. Schizophrenia, substance abuse, many other conditions are still highly stigmatized. Many minority populations have less mental health care, not just because of low access to services, but because of cultural tendencies to keep emotional struggles a secret and a learned distrust of medical institutions. We also shouldn't be too quick to thank science. We haven't really produced a novel psychiatric medication in decades. What's changed, though, is our ideals. We no longer are worshiping the person who conforms to an illusion of normality. Economic, technological changes have allowed people access to the workplace and education that they never had before, even with something as simple as telecommuting. And the person we disdained in the past, like the socially awkward person who was great at computers, well, they're now among our heroes. The high-tech economy is truly the revenge of the nerds. We value diversity, including neurodiversity, today more than we value sameness. So you see, there's nothing hardwired in us to exclude people who suffer. We have to learn those things from our cultures. And if our culture puts stigma and mental illness together, we can surely take them apart. Thank you.